At least 220 people have been killed in the latest fighting in Sudan. It has created more turmoil a year after a military takeover scuttled the transition to civilian rule. So what can bring stability to Sudan? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. The south of Sudan has seen some of the worst violence between rival ethnic communities in months. At least 220 people have been killed in the past week. Security forces have been deployed to calm the situation in Blue Nile state near the border with Ethiopia. The Hausa and Berta tribes have been fighting since July for access to land and resources. Witnesses reported heavy gunfire and homes burned to the ground. International aid agencies are urging all sides to allow them to enter the region. The fighting has triggered protests in the state capital, calling for the governor to be sacked. The UN says at least 1,200 people have been displaced.
These displaced are now in schools as large groups. These habitats are not fit to be camps. It doesn't have the proper health conditions. There are a lot of complications and we can't handle the situation because the flow of displaced is still ongoing. That is why we are calling on aid organizations and friendly countries and the federal government to send the necessary aid.
Well, the ethnic violence has created more instability in Sudan a year after the military takeover. Soldiers shot dead an anti-coup protester in the capital, Khartoum, on Sunday. There have been protests throughout Sudan since Army Chief Abdelkhalig al-Burhan seized power in October last year and ousted a civilian-led government. Talks on resuming the democratic transition have made little progress. Plus, the economic situation is worsening. The World Bank says inflation is at 380%. A third of Sudan's 45 million people don't have enough to eat.
We are demonstrating to make one thing clear. We don't want political compromise, partnership with the army, negotiations, or a political solution. We want to overthrow the coup. And for that, we are ready to pay the price, even with our lives.
Well, let's take a brief look back at Sudan's political upheaval in the past few years, beginning in 2019. That's when a long-time leader, Omar al-Bashir, was pushed out. Then a 3-year power-sharing agreement was established with Abdullah Hamdok as Prime Minister. He served for only about a year when the military arrested him, seized power and quashed protests against the takeover. Since then, the military has expanded its powers. General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan was sworn in as head of the ruling council. Protests against military rule have been held nearly every week since October last year. Let's bring in our guests now. And in Khartoum, we have Hajooj Kuka, political activist and member of Girifna. That's a non-violent resistance movement. And in Manama, we've got Abdelkhalig Shaib. That's he's a Sudanese lawyer and political analyst. Very good to have both of you on the show. Thanks for joining us. Hajooj, there's a lot of instability in Sudan at the moment. It's a complicated picture, but let's start by focusing on the Blue Nile state and these extraordinary levels of violence that we're seeing at the moment. What is the situation there now?
It's horrifying. The pictures that are coming from there, the videos that are coming from there are just simply horrifying. It's really hard to look at. We've been calling our friends there and they're just talking about how the humanitarians, the whole stability is really bad and they need humanitarian help and whatnot. What's really complicated is because it's tribal conflicts, and these tribal conflicts are rooted in political issues and rooted in feeling that you're not heard and all of those things, but they're really being complicated. And what the government right now has, the military government, is only security measures to tackle it. And these measures definitely are not working. So right now, the people are left with fighting each other, fighting the military, like a total loss of control over the Blue Nile. And there's no solutions because the country is, the only thing they have in their hands is weapons. And these are not working right now. Okay. So what's needed is civilian solutions. And the current government is unable to even start processing, start understanding the depth of the root of the problem.
Absolutely. We'll be looking a little bit more at the government in Khartoum in just a moment. For the moment, Abdelkhalig, Shaib, I want to just focus a little bit more on this situation in Blue Nile, because this was a relatively calm state until July, as far as I'm aware. So why have the tensions been breaking out then and again now?
Thank you so much for having me. I mean, broadly, we need to understand that tribal conflicts in Sudan, they are not new. They are renewed every now and then because of the lack of governance in Khartoum, and this has its reflection in the region. But what we need to understand is that there has never been an inclusive process in the Blue Niles or the South Kordofan, which are basically the areas where the conflicts are now erupting. So it started in July as part of a dispute over land. It has always been disputes over land, but this again a manipulation by politicians how to use it. And we also need to understand and keep in mind that the NCPs, the National Congress Party, when they have been toppled and the fall of Bashir's regime, this has left the Sudanese with a vacuum in these areas, and each group are using that vacuum in a different way, and this creating different allies between within these groups. So we need to understand that and keep it in mind. So it was relatively calm, but not necessarily will lead to any stability if we don't see any stability in Khartoum.
Hajooj, how far do you agree with that? Because many do say that what we're seeing right now are not normal cycles of traditional violence, that they do have the added factors of being infiltrated by other Sudanese who are competing for resources and for power. Do you agree with that?
I totally agree with the other guest. I mean, basically, this level of eruption can happen in other places in Sudan. Blue Nile is shocking because they've been more peaceful, because there's less tribal conflicts in the past in Blue Nile. So it is shocking that this is happening. But it is something that we're used to in other places, parts of Sudan. And right now, because of the political situation, in the ability of the SPLA, led by Malik Agar, to actually become a real civilian government and make the people in Blue Nile feel that they're all equal. So all of these things, so the political part is definitely a big part. When the government fails to show people that they can control, they can bring justice and whatnot, people revert back to their tribes. And when you go back to your tribes, all these issues that have been building on for years come to the forefront. And that's what's happening, the inability to solve these issues. Conflict is normal. In Sudan, you're always going to have these conflicts, but you always have to have ways to solve these conflicts. And right now, there's no ways to solve these conflicts. And that's why they erupt. And when they erupt, there's no ways to hold them back.
I guess what I'm trying to get to the bottom of is whether this particular violence is erupting because it's being ignored by the military government in Khartoum or because it's being stoked by the military.
So both in the same level. It's more like they're not able to control them. So it's not that they're using them to do anything over there, but these problems are there. There's a huge economic issue because of the 1 year into the coup, the economics of the country is collapsing. There's all these issues that need to be dealt with. There's all these promises that were given after the revolution, and all of these have not been answered. So now you're just sitting there waiting for things to improve, and they're getting worse. And when they're getting worse, people are trying to solve. There's no government to talk to, so they start going back to their tribal roots, and these issues erupt. And that's more like what's happening in Blue Nile. In other parts of the country, there is more conflict because you have people like RSF and whatnot. But in Blue Nile, it's more the failure of the government to actually act or to become or be able to even address the issues that are happening in the country a year into not having a government that can run the country.
So, Abdelkhalig, what would you say are the reasons for the government failing to act?
I think it's pretty much the political competition. I mean, Hajooj mentioned part of it. I mean, if you look at Malik Agar, he's representing the Sudanese Liberation Movement North, which is part of the Juba Peace Agreement, while Abdelaziz Al-Hilo who's in the Nuba Mountain and heading the Sudanese also liberation movement. He's not part of the Juba Peace Agreement. So you could look at it from that angle. And also, this is not a conflict. It's not new. Malik Agar has been in a conflict with the government before the Juba Peace Agreement and before the 2019 constitutional declaration. So he's always been part of the equation in how things should unfold. So if you look at that, and then you look at how different communities, they're trying to take their different positions, you would understand that it's a political fight. It's not just tribal in that sense. So if you do not find a solution to a peace, a long-lasting peace in the Blue Nile, South Kordofan, and the Nuba Mountains, you will more likely see this erupting over and over. So I think this is part of it. Yeah.
Is it not that the elites, the military, Bashir affiliates, even the pro-democracy movement, they're all too busy in Khartoum focusing on getting power?
They are too busy. This is one thing, but there's also another thing. It's not there's no interest at the moment by Malik Agar to strike a peace deal in the Nuba Mountain and in the Nuba Mountain, the Blue Nile. There's no interest whatsoever to renegotiate the Juba Peace Agreement to make it meaningful for the Sudanese people, to bring peace and justice and security. So if you look at it from that perspective, and also, the elites and the intelligentsia in Khartoum, they are focusing on striking a deal, which is basically a compromise rather than a political solution driven by genuine political process. So you would understand how things are difficult now to solve in the Blue Nile.
I mean, Hajooj, rather, a lot of these problems, these tensions, they stem from access to land, don't they? The Hausa were never given indigenous land rights. They've never indeed been given Sudanese citizenship. The Juba Peace Deal, it was supposed to address these land rights issues. What happened there? Why did it fail to implement these policies?
Okay, I think to bring this into perspective, because it seems very complicated, there's an old Sudan. And the old Sudan is this tribal Sudan that's based on land, having all these issues. And there's this idea of a new Sudan, where it's a citizenship, where it's after post-revolution Sudan. It's a Sudan where we can become a country. Right now, when you're trying to solve the issues by having this peace agreement that is basically talking about the rights of different groups, that is historical rights, that are rights based on your ethnic group and whatnot, it also always makes you to go back to your ethnic groups. And you want to strengthen your ethnic groups so you get these rights. And this makes a conflict between the different ethnic groups. And this is why we have all these tribal conflicts, because really you get power because you're tribal, your tribal power, or because you have a rebel group and you have arms. And this is the old Sudan. So really, with the idea of the old Sudan, what happened in the Juba Agreement and all that, we cannot move forward. And you're always going to have these issues because of that. So the revolution was always about, let's become a country. Let it become part of your rights in the Constitution. Let's all be equal. Let's solve all these problems, the root cause of these problems that divide all of us and make us all not have a certain identity and not be part of this one country on the same level. And this is the idea of the new Sudan, and this is the idea of the revolution. And these are the answers. So as long as you try to solve these issues, not in the roots of them, just try to solve on the surface, you're just unable to. And you're never going to get to the point of a government, and you're never going to get to the point of a country. You're never going to get to the point of ending these issues of land, these issues that are deep-rooted in where you're coming from, which year you came into this country. The Hausa, you've just been there for 150 years or 200 years, and these groups have been long. So all these issues are just historical issues that have deep-rooted issues that need to be solved. And these will never be solved by the Juba Agreement or by having these smaller ways of dealing with the problem in small bites.
Let's bring in Bakry Eljack Elmedni. He's a visiting researcher at the Doha Institute of Graduate Studies. Good to have you with us. Hajooj was just saying that you can divide Sudan into Old Sudan and New Sudan. If we're looking at the crux of the violence that's broken out in the Blue Nile state, how can we overcome that?
First of all, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. It's a historic moment, and it's also a sad moment in the history of the country. But to speak to your question, let me just say, it's in a post-colonial country, it's not unheard of to have tribal conflict and ethnic conflict. That something has been around. The difference is, in the last 30 years, I think there have been an official investment from the authority, and I mean here the Bashir regime. They invested in extreme policies of divide rule. And I have to add, in the aftermath of the coup of October 25th, 2021, there have been an even serious and severe investment in tribalizing politics, ethnic politics, and using tribes as a substitute and a proxy for gaining political power. So from that perspective, I would say Bashir played the game in a way that his regime always knew, as they did the game in Darfur. They played it in the south, in Nuba Mountain, in eastern Sudan, and in Blue Nile as well. But the difference is there used to be a unified central of command. The security apparatus used to have a control over what they were doing. They aligned with certain tribes against other tribes, and they have always had in their mind a plan. As we speak, I think the Sudanese state in its weakest point in history. I would argue there is no government of the day in the country that could say that they have control over the country. Not even the country. I don't even think they have control over the military headquarters, let alone the rest of the country. From that perspective, and I think you could go and say what's going on in Blue Nile is not something that is outside of the ordinary. The difference is now we have an official government investment in making ethnic division and actually using tribes as a way of dividing and as a way of actually using ethnic groups as a way of controlling and divide rule. It's an old trick. Divide rule, it's not something new, but it is dangerous because no one really has the ability to control how this might go. In terms of talking to old Sudan, new Sudan, I think the country is going through a transition. We are witnessing some old institutions, and I'm not talking about socioeconomic institutions that are dying. I'm talking about ethnic, tribal leadership. They don't have the ability to control the country the way they used to be, but also the new institutions that we're talking about that are becoming in place, resistance committees and other kind of political shapes and forms are far away from being materialized. We can't really say we have
let's just jump in there because Abdelkhalig, to the extent do you believe or think that Sudan is going through a transition? We've got Abdel Fattah al-Burhan pledging to step aside for a civilian government, pledging elections. Do you think that's going to happen? Do you think we'll see the rise of the resistance committees into government?
I think this is it will and it will not happen. So basically pledging to transition, we're no longer in transition. We have a coup, basically a government, which is a de facto government in place in Khartoum. But that government is a military. We don't have a sovereignty council, which is basically a sovereignty council. The nature and the definition of sovereignty council will have civilians, which is no longer the case. Now, I think in July, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan said we're going to have we need the civilians to sit together and agree on the way forward. That is unfair because he's basically saying for the pro-democracy movements to sit with the movements and the groups that supported the military. Whether this will lead to anything, the dialogue we are seeing currently in Khartoum is basically to strike a political compromise rather than solving the problem, because you have the pro-democracy movements, you have the RCs, you have those who have been not part of the coup. They are one camp, and then you have the military and those supporting the military from the political parties. They are or the Juba peace signatories. They are also another camp, and then you have those who haven't been part of the process. So I think the threat. The question would be whether if you're going to have an election, would the international community recognize and agree with the election? Will it be a fair election? Do the Sudanese, do they have the ability to go into the elections? Are the political parties ready for the elections? I think the answer to these questions are, is no. At the moment,
Hajooj, I can see you shaking your head there. Do you agree with that now is not the right time to bring elections to Sudan?
I totally agree. I totally agree that to actually get to the point where you can have elections, you need the transitional period. Like he just said, it's completely stopped. There hasn't, we're in a military coup, the transitional period has stopped. The basics to go into voting or not, you need media, you need rules, you need certain institutions to be put in place. They're all not there. So we cannot actually act like we can go into democracy. We need the transitional period. We need a real transitional period, not like what happened before. And we don't have that right now. So right now we're back into a state of revolution. And I feel like what is really amazing over a year into it is the maturity level of the resistance committees. And right now, I think in the street, the consciousness of people in the street has reached a level where they realize that the first step into democracy is to have a parliament, and to have a parliament that is a representative parliament that's real. And this is what we didn't have during the time of Hamdok. And what we want to start with is not a prime minister, is a parliament that then can institute a prime minister, then we can move forward and reach the basis where you can have a democracy to come into state. One thing I want to correct, the resistance committees are never going to go into power. That's not the aim of the resistance committees. What the resistance committees want to do is they want to oversee the creation of a parliament that starts on the grassroots level, local parliaments that then end up into a national government.
Bakry
And this is what is being...
Bakry Eljack Elmedni, do you see a parliament based from the grassroots, growing from the grassroots level as a realistic immediate prospect for Sudan?
I don't think so. I think the issues in Sudan are rather really complex, and I think I'm speaking here from a complete developed proposal. I think if the country has a chance to stay unified and avoid going into chaos and rather civil war, there have to be a serious commitment to dialogue that would bring pro-democracy group as a fundamental group that's speaking to the dreams and aspirations of Sudanese people. But at the same time, if we don't reach enough consensus to provide legitimacy for some type of authority to put the foundation for transitional government, I don't think we're going to get out of here. I think the idea of assuming that resistance committees are a unified body, and I've written a paper on resistance committees, and I think what the media says about resistance committees is very far from what the reality is. I understand that they might think that there is specific bodies that speak for resistance committees, but these are not unified bodies. These are not really, there is an idea, but it's far from saying that, and I don't even know based on what mechanisms and means we can actually get to talk to Sudanese people to build a parliament. That's an aspiration. But I think it could be one of the steps in this broader dialogue that would bring in different political actors. And the revolution is not just resistance committees, they are political parties, they are syndicates, they are professional associations. And to do the right thing is to figure out a way, how do we create a legitimate group that has the representation of Sudanese people. That is something we have to be.
I'm just going to jump in there to give the last word very briefly to Abdelkhalig. What needs to happen immediately to stop this instability in Blue Nile State, in West Kordofan, spreading throughout Sudan?
I think what you need to look at is basically you need a genuine political process in the country, and that political process, once it's in there in Khartoum, it will make things easier for the tribal violence to stop in the region. Otherwise, tribal communities will have to take a side based on the political competitions between which is basically apparent and evident in Khartoum. Unless we reach into to this competition, we're going to see more of this conflict. We've seen it in July, and now it's erupting again in September and October.
Okay, apologies, gentlemen. We will have to leave the discussion there. Hajooj Kuka, Abdelkhalig, Shaib, and Bakry Eljack Elmedni, thank you all very much for taking the time to join us on Inside Story. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, that's aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. We are at AJ Inside Story. From me, Laura Kyle, and the whole team here, it's bye for now.